Not more than a few weeks ago, I received a letter. I say letter, but it was more akin to a manuscript. The paper was worn and old, its colour had turned brown, and the writing was of an ancient style, as though it was written several hundred years ago, and not what we are accustomed to in this enlightened age. This letter I thought strange at first, for as I crossed the hall it lay near the front door, and I get letters delivered rarely to this address. The cottage where I was staying once belonged to my father, but since it was so rarely visited, my family and I had decided to sell it. This was no easy decision, but since my husband had been killed in the Crimean War, the situation of my finances was in doubt. The income from the sale was to be split between my sister and I, my sister whose house I would also move into until I had fully recovered from the death of my husband. The cottage, which was situated near a small village called High Linton, was an isolated place, and one where I did not feel comfortable alone. But while the arrangements were made to sell the cottage, I had to stay here. A solicitor by the name of John Williams, of my family, was to meet me here and value the house. Although not strictly his mandate, he practised in what seemed to be various businesses, and was a trusted friend, so he would take care of all business for the sale of the cottage. This strange letter I had received read, "My time here grows ever shorter. I have so little time. There is blood underfoot, outside. Look outside, it's not safe. I can't protect he who travels." What a curious sequence of words! I wondered if the person who had delivered the letter was still around and perhaps in a muddle of sorts, for the person who wrote it was not in a clear state of mind. I put the letter on the table and went to the front door. I opened it and looked outside, but there was no one in sight. Strange to say in the least. Who on earth could have written it? There was no name of the sender, or for that matter who it was for, and the content made little sense. More like the ramblings of a madman than a warning. Still, it made me feel quite uneasy, and I made sure all the windows and doors were locked that night. I expected John Williams to arrive the day after tomorrow, so I was not overly worried, and for the rest of that day I went about my business, packing items that were to be taken back to London and tidying the areas that needed tidying. But the next morning when I crossed the hall, it was one of the strangest things. There, lying on the floor, was another letter. Crumpled, old, worn, like it was written long ago. I could feel my heart beating as I approached the letter. In my heart I knew that something was not right. Something was menacing. But how could this be? After all, it was just a letter. I picked up the letter, my heart starting to beat faster. I walked into the study, sat down, and placed it in front of me. I looked at it for a moment, wondering was this some kind of practical joke? But who would play such a thing? Not a person of a sane mind, or one that does not have good intentions at heart. I opened the letter and took out the old worn paper inside. My eyes did not want to look, but I forced them upon the page. And there in front of me were more words of menace. "My time here grows shorter. I cannot hold out for much longer. Pray thee to God that she will manifest, and her absence will bring only your downfall. I do all I can do no more. I can feel her presence growing, but there may not be time. Cast your eyes upon the tree that stalks like a witch." Bizarre, I thought to myself. What in goodness could it mean? The tree that stalks like a witch? I had never heard of such a thing. I put the letter back in the envelope, and I went about my business, trying to put the letters out of my mind. That day, I had to go to the local village to collect some supplies. It would be the last journey I would have to make there by myself, and I was glad of it. As I walked the path towards the village, I caught sight of something most off-putting. Could it be? A tree in the field to my left, an oak tree. Its form, it had grown into 3 separate sections, like the hunched shoulders and the head of a witch in a cloak. I stopped dead. I stared. Leave it, I thought. But my curiosity had been woken, and I hopped over a small ditch and walked towards the tree, ever menacing as I approached. No other person or animal was in sight. I walked right up to the tree and looked at it. I was expecting something to jump out at me, but nothing. It was still damp from the night before, where there had been a heavy rainstorm. There were still several drips coming down from the tree. As I looked to where one of the drips fell, I saw something white. I knelt down, brushed some of the mud and leaves away with my hand, and could it be? I brushed some more mud away, to reveal a skeleton finger and then a hand. I scooped more mud away, to reveal the upper section of a skeleton arm. I pulled at it just a little, but there was just the upper arm. I dropped it quickly. I stood up, backed away. My God, I thought to myself, who is sending these letters? It is not safe for me here. Is this a murder? I ran from the field and all the way to the local village, where I found the local carpenter. Hello, is it Matthew? Matthew? Why, yes, madam. Whatever is the matter? I was walking out in the fields and I stumbled across a skeleton hand. My goodness, what a horrible thing! Whereabout did you see this hand? Under a tree near the path into the village, where I've just walked from. Well, madame, Olivia, is it? That's correct. I will go and have a look if you give me specific instructions as to its whereabout. Winters can be pretty harsh in this area, so might have been some poor soul who perished away many years ago in a winter storm. It has been known to happen on many an occasion. Let me get you to my house, and my wife, Ruth, will brew you something hot while I have a look for this hand. I say village, but it was more of a hamlet, and that day I only saw 2 people. While Matthew went to look for the hand, I explained a little more my state and about the letters I had been sent. Ruth was very concerned and said I should stay the night in her house with her husband, Matthew. I wanted to return to the cottage, for I had to wait for John, the solicitor, to arrive tomorrow, and I had to finish the packing. But Ruth insisted, and feeling scared as I did, I relented and agreed to stay the night. Matthew returned, and he had found the skeleton hand. It seemed so less menacing than before. He reckoned the hand was a victim of the weather or an accident. Many people travelled past the village on the way to London, so it could have been a traveller or a tradesman. Matthew, to my relief, was not overly concerned about the hand, but was more concerned about the letters. He said I should stay with them until I had finished my business here. I felt I had to go back to the cottage the next day, though. After all, it would be the last time I ever lived in the cottage. And the cottage, being no more than a 15-minute walk from the village, it should be safe. The next morning I was feeling a little calmer and walked back to the cottage with Matthew. Today I was expecting the arrival of John, the solicitor, so I could finish my business with the cottage and then move on. The cottage was the same as I had left it, and everything felt safe in the morning light. I bid Matthew a good day and said I would go to the village before I left to say goodbye. After Matthew left, I had my breakfast, and as I crossed the hall, there another letter on the floor. Now, being in a heightened emotional state, I grabbed this letter and ran to the fireplace. I put it in, and with a match I lit and watched it burn. I sat there staring as it smouldered. This may not have been the wisest thing to do, but they were now causing me the most awful distress, and I let my emotions get the better of me, for it would have been a far wiser decision to open and read what was inside. I brushed the ashes up and put them into the tin ashpan. I stood up. This place, this time, has not been easy for me. I will be glad to move on. My actions mattered little, for in the hall was another letter, not more than a few moments after I had burnt the previous one. What in God's name was this? I flung open the front door and shouted at the top of my voice, "Who in God's name is doing this? Show your face!" But I got no reply. I slammed the door shut, ran to the study, and put the letter onto the table. I wish my husband was here now. That support, that tenderness, that protection I so badly need. His death was hard enough to bear, but being left with this bitter loneliness has got to be an equal burden, and one I have not dealt with before. Maybe I should not have come up here alone. My mother and sister said it was a bad idea, but I wanted to be alone, although this was no longer the case, and now I feared my own sanity was not stable. My sister, Jacqueline, was never keen on my husband and believed the marriage was a mistake. I don't believe she ever saw him the way I did. I only wish she could have. Still, she warned me against him, saying he was not trustworthy and had a cold streak in his heart. So upon hearing of the news of his death, I don't believe that she was upset, although she gave her condolences. I only wish she could have got to know him better. I looked at the letter and opened it. It read, "In the forest, like the oracle that you seek, your life, no matter where you are, is in danger. Remember as you were young, that place, that fear you could never step into. There the answers you will find." This letter, probably the strangest of them all. That fear, answers you will find? What exactly does it think I'm looking for, if these letters are intended for me? Am I in danger? It appears that I am, or the victim of a cruel joke. I must think back to when I was a child. Was there a place I wouldn't go because I was scared? I can't remember. And if there was, who in God's name would know that? It must be someone close to me. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of port and went to the living room to sit down. The thought crossed my mind to leave this place, but John would be here today, and finally I could get the arrangements made. Then I could leave tomorrow, or maybe even this evening. I sat back in the chair, feeling tired, for I had not slept well the last couple of nights. Then suddenly I remembered, yes, when I was a child, there was an old stone mill that was no longer used. Me and my sister used to go there, but never went inside, for it was far too scary. But could it be there after all these years? And would it not have fallen down or been dismantled? Against my better judgment, I decided to leave the cottage and go to the mill. It wasn't that far away, and I could walk there in about 20 minutes, possibly quicker. I put on my overjacket and walking shoes and set out towards the mill. The sky was darkening and storm clouds were building, which made me think twice about walking there, but the letters and their hidden meaning were taking an ever stronger hold of me. The wind was picking up as I walked, and the brown leaves were starting to fall from the trees as autumn set in. I walked quickly towards the mill. Could it be a trap or something worse? What were the letters trying to tell me, and why were they written like riddles? A raindrop landed on a leaf, and then another and another, as the rain began. About 15 minutes later, I arrived at the old mill. It was much as I remembered, but its front wall had collapsed, and it was in a much worse state of repairs. It must have been built well, for it shouldn't have been standing at all. As I approached the old mill, the old fear came back. There was an entrance that led down to a large cellar, but I could not see in, for it was completely cut off from light. I should have brought some form of light with me. My heart began to pound. I'm not sure if it was fear from my childhood or just fear, possibly a mix of them both. The rain became heavier and heavier. I approached the entrance, my heart pounding, like not in control of my own body. I turned. I couldn't go there. I thought to myself, I must get some light first, and the rain would make the steps down to the cellar dangerous. An excuse possibly, but nevertheless, I walked away. I stopped dead in my tracks, for up the path there was a figure, and it did not look human. It was wearing an old black cloak, and the hood covered its face. The cloak was old and torn, and I swear I could see no feet. I felt terrified, so scared my heart pounded in my chest. As the rain poured, I ran into the forest. I knew the forest well, so I took another route back to the cottage. But I wasn't sure if I had taken the right direction. The rain made my flight so much more difficult. Slipping and soaked as I ran, I didn't look back as I fled that place. Up a hill, I ran, and when I got to the top, the cottage was in the distance, several 100 meters away from me. I ran to the door, opened it, and slammed it shut behind me. My heart beating so fast, and my lungs aching from the sprint. I stopped and got my breath back. I did not wish to stay another evening. I flung my clothes into my bag and packed anything else that was mine. John should be here in the afternoon, but I don't think I'll be able to wait that long. By the late afternoon, I had calmed down and had begun wondering to myself if I had not seen the vision of the person in the cloak at all, and if it was all just an illusion of my mind. I was, after all, feeling scared at the time, and I only saw the thing for a few seconds and never looked back. Still, I again made sure all the windows and doors were fastened and kept looking out of the window towards the entrance to the cottage, hoping for John to arrive. But he did not arrive, and by the time the sun started to set, I was becoming worried. The weather had been bad, so maybe that had delayed him, but he was known for his good timekeeping. I lit some lanterns to make sure the cottage was well lit and paced the cottage, waiting for his arrival. Then, as I passed the hall not long before going to bed, I saw on the floor of the hall another letter. My heart leapt, and for a moment I was terrified. I daren't open the front door. I left the letter where it was and rushed to my room. I shut the door and hid in a corner of the room. It felt like my time on earth was coming to an end. In the corner of my bedroom, I started to drift asleep. But then, in the very far distance, and very faintly, I heard what sounded like someone calling a name. I listened. There it was again. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like a name being called. I wanted to hide, but I may be in danger, and I should listen out. I crept to the window and looked out. I could see across the fields, but I could see no person. I heard the calling again. It was a female voice, and it sounded like it may have been calling my name. Could it be? The voice seemed to drift over the fields and was very faint, and I could not quite make out what it was saying. But then its tone started to change, and it got louder and angry. The call turned to a shout, and I sat back from my window. Then it turned into a screeching. And to my horror, it sounded as though it was getting closer and closer. The screeching got louder and louder until it sounded as though it were a few feet from outside of my home. This was unbearable. Was I going insane? I could think of only one thing to do. I rushed to the hall and picked up the letter, rushed into the study, lit a candle and opened the letter. The screeching stopped. Silence. I daren't look at the letter, but I had no choice. The lines of writing touched my eyes in the dim candlelight. Step into your fears. It is the only way you will survive. They are there, just open your eyes. They are there. I will only speak to you once more, then this will be complete. Look into the scope of your love's eye. For there was no love there. She is your only hope now. Only she can save you, but she's still not here. I was confused again. Who is this she that is going to save me, and where was there no love? But my confusion was soon forgotten when a drop of blood hit the front of the letter. I lurched back in my seat in shock and fear. Then my eyes slowly rose up to the ceiling. At first I saw nothing. I lifted the candle higher, and in the ceiling a red patch had stained, and another drop fell to the desk. What in God's name was this? Must I now go upstairs to see what could have caused this? Is it really blood? Can I not run? But the strange screeching that was coming outside is more than I can bear. Shall I leave it till the morning? I will not be able to sleep either way. No, I cannot go upstairs into the attic. I cannot bear it. I will wait until first light, for I still have my sanity. And another drop of blood fell onto the desk. I ran to my bedroom and collapsed in a corner. First light awoke me, and although I thought I would have gotten no sleep, I appeared to have drifted off for an hour. I got up, and the terrible events of the evening before came flooding back into my mind. I stood up, went to the bathroom, and washed myself. I put on clean clothes and walked into the study, hoping that all of the night before had just been a bad dream. But there on the desk, a pool of blood had formed, and the ceiling was stained red. I walked to the room next to the study, a room used as a storeroom with a ladder and entrance to the attic. I lit a candle that had a handle and put the ladder against the wall and slowly advanced upwards. I got to the attic door and slowly and quietly pushed it open. There was silence. I ventured slowly forward and put the candle in front of me. There were some gaps in the thatched roof that let light stream in, and there was a small window in the arch of the front of the roof, so there was enough light to see. As I pushed my head up, I could only see one section of the attic, and there were just a few boxes. I lifted the candle up and turned to look down the attic, and to my horror, over where the study was, hung a body. A rope tied around its neck, hanging from the rafters, and its feet just touching the floor. I lurched back, but for some reason I did not run, and I did not take my eyes off of the body. And I could see no other person in the attic. I climbed into the attic and walked towards the body. Its face turned from me. I turned the body, and there was John Williams. His throat had been cut. "John!" I cried. I rushed down back into the storeroom and put out the candle. This cottage was not safe, and I had to leave. I didn't have time to get my bags. I ran for the hall, but there, as I should have guessed, lay another letter. I'll be damned. I sank to my knees and picked up the letter. I opened it. "I have to leave now. I can do this no longer. She has not arrived, and she is your only hope. If you want answers, then go back to the place you fear the most." Why have I been cursed with this, the most strange of events? I sank down onto my backside and leaned against the wall. I was not sure if I could go on. 2 loud knocks at the door jolted me. I froze. I could not be seen from where I sat. Again, 2 loud knocks. I waited, but again, 2 loud knocks. I slowly moved as carefully as I could to get to a small window next to the door. I looked outside. and there was an old man with white, withering hair and old clothes. If he had come to kill me, then surely he wouldn't announce his presence. Especially if he could get a dead body into the attic without my attention and without spilling blood in any other location of the cottage. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Good day, I said. Olivia? He said. Yes, how do you know my name? No time for explanations. You don't know who I am, and that does not matter. But I can tell you this much. I am old and fragile, and will be of little help to you, but you must not let him get away with this. What, is it you that has been sending these letters? I am just the messenger, but I must go now. It will finish today. Be brave. Go to the place you fear. That is the way forward. The way to justice. I was going to question him more, but I realized he could not see. He was blind, his pupils white. Wait! Who are you? What is going on? But he turned and started to walk away. Where are you going? You can't just leave. I followed him to the front gate of the cottage. I beg you, sir, if you have answers to what is happening, then let me know. A man is dead, and I fear for my own life. But he kept on walking. I stopped in my tracks. Please, sir, don't leave me alone like this. I cannot do this by myself. But he kept on walking. He walked around a corner of a hedge, and in that moment, I knew that would be the last time I would ever see him, and I knew that he was not responsible for the murder. I don't know how, I just did. Woman's intuition, I guess. Or maybe the fact that he was very old and blind. Then I had a strange feeling, a flicker of recognition. He reminded me of a man from my childhood, an old man I used to see sometimes in the village, but I recall hearing that he had passed away. A calmness came over me, for I now knew what I had to do. The place I have never dared venture before was the place I must seek out and enter. I must overcome my fears. Facing it, that is the only way forward, facing it. I got a gas lamp and took a knife from the kitchen. I intended it to be for self-defense, although I had little knowledge of whether I would need it. I wrapped the knife in cloth and put it under my belt. I locked the cottage and set out towards the mill. I arrived, and it was the same as the last time I had seen it. My heart was pounding, but I knew what I had to do and could not turn and run this time. Whatever had been happening to me, I had to finish it. I should have got help, but something inside told me for this unique circumstance, I had to do this one thing by myself. I slowly approached the entrance to the cellar and lit the lamp. My heart pounding. I took my first footstep onto the wooden step. It was damp, but creaked a little as I put weight onto it. I had to step carefully, for I feared I may slip. I took another step, and another, going down into the darkness of the cellar, the lamp lighting my way, but only lighting a small section in front of me and giving me no great distance to view. I went further and further down until I reached the ground level. The cellar smelt mouldy and damp. There was the sound of dripping from one of the corners, and paths of dirt and slime had built up on the walls, where years of rainwater had been pouring down sections of the wall. The cellar floor was soft underfoot, and I figured no flooring had been put down upon the earth the foundations were built on, or the floor had rotted away. I moved the lamp around, but could see very little. There were some old tools and some old barrels. My fear was subsiding, and there appeared to be little to be afraid of. Then a table caught my eye, and what was on it. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness, and the cellar was becoming easier to see around. But on this table there appeared to be writing materials and letters. But these were no old letters. These were new letters. I walked over to the table and looked at the items. There was writing on an open piece of paper, but it was not in the style I had been receiving the letters. It was a modern, professional style. The letter read, "Over the past few months, I have come to realize I am not of a sound mind. I did not want to murder John Williams, but the grief of the death of my husband has overcome me, and his presence reminding me of my husband caused me to lash out in the most unsavory manner. I have also taken to writing letters and sending them to myself. Now I have a brief moment when my mind is clear. It is clear that I cannot go on living this way, so I must put a stop to it all. Yours sincerely, Olivia Dell." My God, a suicide note from myself? Who would have written this? What on earth is going on? Is this some sort of scheme to steal the cottage away from me, or maybe more? My husband had some financial troubles before his death, A terrible thought suddenly occurred to me. I must take this letter before whoever wrote it returns. I'm not sure what struck me more, the icy pain from the blade pushed into my back, or the realization my husband was not only alive, but was also the perpetrator of my murder. The blade from his knife pierced my lower back and went into my stomach. My head thrown back in pain, I turned in shock, sheer amazement across my face. The man I loved had betrayed me so ruthlessly and so coldly. How could I have fallen for this man? Something in my heart told me there was more, but I didn't listen. Inexperience and my awareness being overridden by my emotions. A mix of these things together. It didn't matter now anyway. Nothing was spoken. He held the dagger, dripping with my blood. I guess poor John would now be framed for my murder, and his suicide, his redemption. When a smile appeared upon my lips, he looked confused, for he could not see the vision that I could see advancing towards him. She, or should I say it, had arrived. The letters, the warnings from the grave came vengeance. The figure I had seen in the forest, manifested, now advanced towards him. He raised his dagger, but it was too late. An icy hand of not much more than skeleton raised up and touched him on the shoulder. He didn't turn with shock, like you would expect a murderer to. His face turned as pale as the moon, and a chill was sent down him. His face, with a horror I will never forget. He turned to behold the love of a life gone past. Another lover he had betrayed, but there would be no escape for him now. I don't remember much more of that night. From that moment, my conscious waking began to fade. As I slowly died from my wound, I remember him falling forward, as though dying in that spot. As I fell to the ground from my own wound, I saw him being dragged away. I would never see him again. My eyes slowly closed. What a terrible end, I thought to myself. The sunlight from the new morning hit my eyes, and I awoke outside, at the edge of the forest in a meadow not far from where I lived. Was I dead or alive? I was in some pain, although very little, so I suppose I was alive. I sat up and looked around me. It was morning, and indeed it appeared I was still alive. Saints be praised! I felt my lower back, and although there was a fresh wound there, I felt no blood. It must have stopped bleeding. I stood up and wobbled on my feet for a few seconds. I was alive! I hadn't been tricked. She did it for me, whoever she was. Some years later, long after I had sold the cottage, I heard news from the village that a large pond near the village had been dredged by a farmer. In the pond they found 2 skeletons, one with a hand missing, and the other with a dagger clasped in its skeleton hand.